after natural disasters. That's what they're trained to do. It's the American people who are paying them right now to be spreading mulch in Washington, D.C., in part because of budget cuts related to the park police and because there's nothing else for them to do. But I think perhaps even more dangerous is what we're hearing about what they might be doing in places like Memphis and New Orleans, because they are not trained to do local law enforcement. And indeed, depending on what authorities the president seeks to use to actually deploy them, it may actually be in violation of law, like we just saw out in Los Angeles. It's not clear whether he intends to federalize them like he did in Los Angeles or use Title 32, which I think arguably that authority does not allow for domestic law enforcement. And in fact, some of the state laws don't allow for it. But more importantly, it's dangerous for people to be who are trained in combat, right? Trained for overseas dangerous missions against enemy combatants, where the rules of engagement and the use of force are completely different than what they are doing domestic law enforcement. And that, talk about burning trust. And I think military leaders, at least those informers who I've talked to, they're that relationship, that civil military relationship is so important. And that's where they're concerned that the damage could be very severe.
Mary, I want to stick with what you just said about Title 32 and dig in a little bit deeper to the legalese of it all, because this Washington Post report also reports that, according to documents obtained by Alex Horton and the reporters on this, that Pete Hegseth in a memo notified Kristi Noem and Pam Bondi that they were going to basically use Title 32 in order to avoid violating the Posse Comitatus Act in this draft memo. But it sounds like you feel like that's still not a valid workaround. So
here's the thing. Title 32 means that the National Guards stay under the command and control of their governors, as opposed to being federalized and under the command and control of the president. And in Title 32, Posse Comitatus Act does not apply. But the section that has been used and, in D.C. and that is purported to be used is a section called Section 502F. This is a section about training or other duty. So that training that the National Guards do 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, that is the legal authority for them to be called forth, paid for by the federal government, and do training. There's other words in there called other duty. And what the government is trying to do here is shoehorn this crime control mission into other duty. Other duty historically has been things like support to border operations, things that Congress has authorized. There is nothing in the history or use of that statute that would suggest it is appropriate to be used for general crime control. And I think there's a real legal argument here that it does not authorize that.
Well, General, to that point, this fear that the National Guard is being moved into general sort of crime control. Listen to what Vice President Vance had to say in an interview on Wednesday, and then I have a follow-up a question about this on the other side.
I would love if we did this in every big American city, because I think that American citizens deserve to live safely in these big cities. They don't right now, but it doesn't have to be like this. We just have to change the leadership.
So, General, as someone who has lived in cities pretty much his entire life, yeah, we want to be safe in our cities. But I'm just wondering, are the fears that the militarization of sort of local law enforcement will lead to them undertaking other functions, moving out of, say, crime control and into things like, say, getting involved in elections and protecting ballot boxes and things like that, I hear from people that is one of their major concerns about now having the military on American streets, or at least National Guard.
Well, it's clearly of concern. A few years ago, I would have said, oh, that's impossible. That'll never happen. That can't happen. But unfortunately, with the actions that are being taken by the Trump administration, it clearly is possible. I have to go back to the National Guard's not trained to do this. And this is a waste of a resource. And every dollar that you take away from the Department of Defense, away from National Guard training and National Guard deployments, is a dollar you don't have to respond to hurricanes in New Orleans or to tornadoes in the Midwest. So this is just such a blatant misuse of a very well-trained force that is not trained to do law enforcement or any of these other tasks that you mentioned. But could it happen? Unfortunately, I would have to say today, yes.
Congressman, in the short time that we have left with you, I'm a military brat, and so one thing I've always heard from my dad and all his friends when we were growing up is the thing that's almost most important when military folks are sent, whether it's the National Guard or the Marines, is that the rules of engagement are very clear. What their mission is, the mission parameters are so important. And with this kind of always changing kind of amorphous rules of engagement or mission parameters that the president is seemingly giving the National Guard when they go to these places, it is not just, the bad for their morale, it is dangerous for them. It puts them in a situation where they may be making decisions that they're not trained to make.
Well, that's absolutely correct. And let's be honest again, they're getting minutes, hours of training. They're not getting days or weeks of training like we would get before going into an overseas deployment. And as Jonathan pointed out, the civilian law enforcement is vastly different than operating in a military capacity. Soldiers are trained the Pentagon hates it when I say this. My wife doesn't like it when I say this, but soldiers are trained to break things and kill people. We're not trained to do civilian law enforcement. We're not trained in the constitutional niceties of how to make a proper arrest that'll stand up in court. That's not what we're trained to do. So don't try to make a silk purse out of a pig's ear, as my grandpa used to say.
They get inspired. Almost always we see that they have researched similar shootings, and that is probably why we see the writing on the guns, writing on the ammo. He is emulating, yes, copying, but these other actions on the internet shown over and over and over again do inspire like-minded people. So there's a lot to be said for scrubbing it, for keeping it down, and actually for moving on. Let the wheels of justice, due process, do their job without access from the public all the time, because there are a lot of minds out there that are fallow gardens for a lot of this violent rhetoric and political rhetoric. So, go outside and touch grass, but then stay outside in the pasture.
Right, as the Utah governor said. So, Luke, when you write that Trump condemned Kirk's murder, you write that he spoke of the tragic consequence of demonizing those with whom you disagree day after day, addressing violence against the right, with no mention of recent violence against Democrats. So what did Trump exclude, and what does it reveal about his views on political violence?
Right. Well, he in his speech from the Oval Office, he condemned the demonization of one's opponents, which I think, many researchers saw as a welcome statement. That's part of the problem in this mess as a country, that we way too often dehumanize and demonize our political rivals. But then he pivoted to saying listing only acts of violence that seem to stem from the left, right? So he ticked off a number of examples: the shooting of Steve Scalise and Republicans at the baseball practice in Congress, a number of other examples. But he made no mention of the attack on Paul Pelosi, or the firebombing of Josh Shapiro's house, or the killing of the Minnesota lawmakers and the shooting of lawmakers in Minnesota. So he seemed to be trying to create an image where there's only one side that's violent in America, and we know that that's not true. Every study has shown political violence in America runs every conceivable direction: right on left, right on right, left on left, left on right. And sometimes there's not even a clear ideology. It's a mishmash of sort of insane ideas gained from the internet. Yeah. But what they all do have in common is that somebody had access to a gun, typically, and they were online constantly filling their head with all sorts of hateful ideas about other people.
Can I get from you, Casey, your thoughts on the best avenue for healing or unifying this country?
Okay, let's just start with the obvious. Love your children, no matter who they are or what they are. It's okay to condemn acts, but we don't condemn people, certainly for not their beliefs and not for their sexual identity or sexual or gender identity. I think the biggest thing we have found out in the last day that's really, to me, brought it all together, because I always thought this attack was more personal than political, is that the alleged shooter is in a relationship with his roommate. They're romantic partners, and that his partner is transitioning from male to female. Make of that what you will. This, to me, brings it all together. He lives in a community and perhaps with a family for which his identity is an aberration. So everyone, especially parents, need to step back and love your children no matter who they are, because ostracism and alienation is what causes that fallow ground where the violence can take hold. So just love
I have
your
a
kids.
feeling that if we had more time, you could probably list 20 things we could all be doing, but that certainly is a good one to start. As the mother of two, I got to say, you've got to love your kids the way they are, and then they'll love you back.
We're going to look back on a few moments when the Republicans lose the midterms. That's what I'm predicting. We're going to look back because you lose the midterms sometimes, not on the election night, but you lose them months before, and in some cases more than a year before, right? As you say, oh, like we lost on tonight, a Tuesday in November. No, you actually lost before. The losses came then, and they're going to happen in some red states too. They will lose seats in red states. At least that's my prediction. And, we saw it with the 2022 midterms. The Republicans lost their red wave. I know they still took the House, but they lost their red wave, and they lost their chance at winning the Senate in 2022, not in November of 2022, but they lost it when Dobbs dropped. That's the day they lost that. There were other factors, of course, Donald Trump still being very extreme, the economy still not being perfect, but inflation slowing down a little bit as Biden's presidency went on. But it was mostly like Dobbs, right? Like women losing their fundamental human rights thanks to Trump appointed judges, and they voted against Republicans based not on what was happening in November, but what happened months and months and months before. And I do think that when we look at Trump's approach to this moment, because let's be clear, a lot of people in a nonpartisan way feel awful about what happened to Charlie Kirk. They feel awful about it. They feel awful for him, of course, for his wife, for his children. And it's not even strictly about partisan politics. They just feel bad for this young man and his family. And there was an opportunity here to, put forward a message of unity, saying, look, so many people disagreed with him, but there's a moment of unity here, a common humanity, a common dignity, a common sadness. How many American families, left, right, and center, have been touched in some way by gun violence? Millions, right? Millions of families. But Donald Trump chose to make this moment about division, and in so doing, he shows why he's more and more and more unpopular. Because he was given a second chance by the American people. He didn't deserve it. The American people were wrong. I'm not a coward, I'll tell you. The voters made a stupid choice. The American people. They were wrong. But they gave him another chance. And every single day, and it includes moments like this, where he doesn't act like a president, he blows it, and he blows the Republicans' chances in 2026.